Are we live?
We are.
Hi, party people. This is Olade Shiombola. I'm here for, this is our first NARPES town hall. So super duper excited for this today. You know, we wanted to mix it up. We wanted to make sure that we have the community as part of the conversation on Saturdays. So thank you to all of you who've been watching with us from the first Black Genius episode. We appreciate you. Say what's up in the comments so we know you're here. So it's a town hall because we got to talk. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to figure out. And we want to make sure that we hear from our community. So for anybody who knows me, you know that my research, master's and PhD is about, diaspora identity. So I look at Nigerian immigrant identity and super duper passionate about this topic because that's my story, right? And so when I first got to Yale, I met Damar, Jean-Louis, Ifeanyi, and these are three people who were just super passionate about this topic. Ifeanyi was always texting me about all the tensions on campus. So we're gonna get into it. What up, Omari? Oh, okay. We got 6 people, well, 5 people here with me today. I want you guys to kind of introduce yourself. I'm just gonna say, kind of why I asked you to join us. So Damar is doing a PhD in sociology. He's ABD. You're ABD now, right?
Yep. Which
means all but dissertation. So, and it's Jean-Louis' birthday today. Happy birthday, Jean-Louis. Can we get Happy birthday. Jean-Louis, super duper well read when it comes to Black history and the movement and identity. Lanice, I'm gonna have to let you introduce yourself because we didn't get to probably catch up. But Lanice was invited by Raquel. So talk about what the work that you do in DC.
So my background is I work in global health. So I've worked in both domestic public health work as well as global health. My current organization I work with, we do work around HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria in about over 100 countries. And right now work has been a bit crazy with COVID-19 because a lot we've been particularly focusing on mitigating the impacts of COVID-19 on HIV, TB, and malaria programs. And there's been a lot that has been going on, but yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm grateful for Raquel for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us. And you represent the great island of Jamaica, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
So Jean-Louis did his master's at, I'm just jumping around, y'all. It's Saturday. It's been a long week. Did his master's at Yale Divinity. And now you're doing a master's in social work at Columbia. Talk about your interest, Jean-Louis, real quick.
Yeah.
And you're Haitian American.
I'm so interested in, what's up?
No, I'm just saying Haitian American.
Oh yeah. You already know. I miss the Jamaica heavy. So
we can barely hear you. You got to speak up.
I said I mess with Jamaica heavy, so big shout out to Jamaica as well.
Okay.
So my interests, lie between the intersects of community engagement, economic progression, but also social justice. And so looking at ways in which, not just in the educational institutions that we're a part of, but all institutions that we're a part of, how can we create policies that actually, better the lives of people and change the material realities of individuals? So my focus actually at Columbia School of Social Work is working with policymakers and legislators to sort of see what we can do to change particular policies that affect Black and Brown communities. One of the professors I'll be working with is Dr. Ronald Mincy, who's also a renowned economist, but also a policymaker as well too. And he served in several of the previous administrations before the current one now.
Beautiful. Ifeanyi Okafor, Yale SOM. You're currently at Amazon. Talk about your work and your interest in, diaspora identity.
Oh, well, yeah. So I moved to the U.S. 2017 for my MBA. That's when I met Damar, Raquel, Lolade, Jean-Louis. Yeah. So did my MBA 2 years, moved to the West Coast, Seattle. I've been finding a lot about the timing of this event. I told someone I had something like
we moved it a whole hour for you. You and Alex.
This person doesn't want to take people in the West Coast or what? This is so it's 7:08 here. But yeah, so I moved to the West Coast and joined Amazon as a senior program manager. So far, it's been good. It's totally different from the East Coast here. Totally different. Very small town. Not that many Black people, but so far it's been but then it's very they're very welcoming generally. And for me, and my interest in this is mostly because I think my own experience is like very different from everyone else here, because I'm like probably a US person in the US, like on this panel, right? So I kind of like still see things very much from the lens of I probably have a lens that is as close to what you see back home in Nigeria as possible. So I can kind of speak about how the average Nigerian still in Nigeria now sees things, But then with the alignment of having been here, kind of like having a bit of a tilt, how I see things, some things I would have dismissed, being here now and experiencing them. So it's kind of like a mix of the total 100% Nigerian, and then I've been here now 3 years, 3 years and a month or something. Okay, this is actually how this is. So I think my interests are just trying to understand more, trying to like be as open, and still trying to learn as much as I can learn. So I think for this panel, my big contribution would just be, hey, that's not how we see things. Yeah, this is how we see things back in Nigeria.
You cannot speak for the whole of Nigeria. If
No.
You always speaking for the entire country.
I know why you're saying that, because we always argue about some things, like, that. Okay,
you
but
can't
yeah,
speak for all of us.
I can't speak for the whole of Nigeria. Well, but yeah, that's my story mostly, and happy to be on this panel. Happy to contribute, talk about my experience, anything else that I haven't mentioned. But my passion, like I said, regarding to these things is mostly has to do with like, okay, why is there difference in outcomes and stuff, and then gradually I begin to see why, and I'm happy to talk about what I've seen and what could be why I'm seeing some things. I could be wrong, but I don't know it all. I also learn from everyone on this panel. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Ifeanyi. Uzo Maka, my darling co-founder, let me let you do your thing. Talk about your passion. Wow. So the first time you and I spoke, I asked you how you would identify yourself. And I will never forget your answer. So let's talk about your identity and your interest in this topic.
What did I answer you? I said, I'm a melanated being.
Yeah.
So my perspective is of a global, universal, galactic perspective, who we are as beings, having a human experience, as spiritual beings having a human experience here on Earth, and kind of bringing more of the metaphysical, spiritual, ancient, futuristic perspective into the conversation. So I'm excited to be here with you guys. I'm excited for this conversation. I think it's so important, because we really have to come together, unity throughout the diaspora and Africans. It has to happen. We got to heal. So I'm excited about this. So thank y'all.
Me too. It's been on my heart for a very long time. It was the original reason, I even got into podcasting, was because of this conversation that I wanted to have. So I'm excited to get started. Demar, I didn't let you talk about your research.
Well, sure. I could talk a little bit. So I'm a PhD candidate both in sociology and African American studies. So I think broadly my work focuses on the health consequences of policing, incarceration, and historical racial violence for the most of the United States. So I stepped into this conversation as a Black American. I was born in Los Angeles, New York, and Denver. And I feel like, and I'm also the product of a biracial marriage, or parentage, I should say. So, with that, varying family experiences, but like I had very little exposure, I would say, to the diaspora until I left where I knew was home. So until I moved to Minnesota for college at the University of St. Thomas, and then Blackness became this like different thinking. It's not just kids from the U.S. It's not just, and people tap into Blackness in various ways. And so, I think how that brings me here to today is because, I agree with a lot of folks here. It's important for us to kind of translate across, diaspora, to translate our experiences to one another, but also to understand, the differences in our experiences, differences in our politics, but how, we all, experience and are connected to, this thing called Blackness, and we in Black studies say, that there's various lexicons you can look at Blackness from, right? So, you can look at Blackness as that in and of itself. You can look at Blackness as negritude, as Sarah talked about. You can look at Blackness in a lot of ways, but I think like it's been said, for me, I think it's important not only to build community, but also to find ways like how do we, address the issues that are materially affecting us in the various communities that we represent, right? And how can we work together to strategize on ways to do that? That may be similar to what's been done historically, but also might be different given the changing circumstances we find ourselves in.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's an important moment to be having this conversation, right? So if you read the post that we put up on NordPress, we talked about there's so many different vantage points from which we can engage with this dialogue, but when we look around, it's the George Floyd moment, right? Like we're in the most unforgettable time in all of our lives, right? Like this is going to be what our children, learn about like for generations. And we had the whole COVID-19 pandemic, and then the George Floyd protests kind of took off. And it's a moment of reckoning, right? So now you have all of these organizations and personalities, starting to recognize like the glory of Blackness. And some of it is pandering, some of it is, just like that artificial, making sure their bottom line is covered. And some people are actually waking up. And so I'm curious how you guys are thinking about this moment and, what needs to happen right now. What is our way forward? I know this wasn't on the list of questions. I like to just like shoot from the hip. But what do we make of this moment from a global Black perspective?
I think this moment is as devastating as it is an opportunity. It's like a hard stop, and it has allowed a lot of people to kind of stop with their routines and to rethink certain things. So I think it's almost like a reset for us, where we get an opportunity to stop, reset, rethink, reorganize, and a lot of things that some of us have been planning to do now, like you said, a lot of people are waking up. So certain things that was said before that many people weren't taking seriously, now it's like, this is time. So to me, I would say it's like a hard reset.
What do you think, Tamar?
Well, I think, before we can like before we collectively move towards anything, we have to actually become a collective. So I think like it's important because if we, looking at what happened with the George Floyd protest, it's very easy to mobilize around that because police violence is a global issue, right? White supremacy is a global issue. So there's ways in which like that's an easy issue to mobilize around to some extent because it's something everybody experiences everywhere. As we move away from that issue, the convening point changes, right? Like, because for some people, maybe they mobilize around like access to healthcare, right? Maybe some people mobilize around, access to education, access to whatever, other social determinants or other important resources, right? But, I think it's important to recognize that, like, even with people all mobilizing on George Floyd, there's still a lot of divisions that exist, within and across communities, right? And so I think, I always think it's important to find ways to, build and, critical coalitions is what I'll call it, but, build a relationship with people, find people who are, understand what is it that people are working towards, right? Because I think, we can't just collectively all move forward in every dimension because not everybody's down for that, right? Not everybody cares about what's happening in the criminal legal system. So like that might not be, a case like George Floyd, people mobilize around that. But if we were to say, let's abolish prisons, let's abolish jails, they'd be like, whoa, like I'm not down for that, right? And so I think, we're in a moment where we have to, be getting to know one another, but also understanding like what's important to us. And that way we can begin to start to think about, what the future might look like and start dreaming that up together. But I don't think we're in a moment yet where we can collectively all do anything because it depends on which collective you're talking about and who's there.
Let me hear from Lenice. So you've been on the front lines. You've been, watching everything unfold right before you. What do you think of what's happening right now and what the opportunity that's been mentioned, the collectivism? What are your thoughts?
So I would say, like, just looking at everything that, I mean, of course, seeing what happened is traumatic. I think to me, the first time, I say it was the first time to actually see white people like finally wake up. But I think part of it was also like a denial thing. I mean, even when I look at healthcare and working in public health, racism is a public health issue. I mean, even if you look at how Black patients, white patients, Asian people are treated, I mean, you see the disparities, you see the inequalities. And I agree with Damar, right? It depends on what sector you're in and what collective and how you feel about it. But I feel like at the end of the day, when it comes to systems of oppression and white supremacy, you have to attack it at the core. And it's not all us. It's not all us doing it. White people are going to have those difficult conversations that they don't want to have. I mean, even if you look at it in the diaspora, I mean, there's still issues within the Black community, right? There's still colorism, right? For example, like in my family, if you look at this, all of us range in different states. I mean, the model for Jamaica is out of many white people. 2 of my aunts are half Chinese. I mean, I've even experienced colorism, right? You even see in a lot of countries like the Caribbean, in the continent, there's still like these sentiments of anti-Blackness is so deep from colonialism that you find people wanting to bleach their skin or change who they are. So I think there's a lot that we have to kind of unpack and unlearn as a community to move forward, but also there's other things that we need our counterparts who are in positions of power to also do as well.
I feel like, thank you for sharing that, Lanice. And, I totally agree. I feel like Uzo's been itching to say something because I've heard white supremacy like twice. And I know how you feel about that term. Can you just say some things about the term white supremacy real quick?
Oh my goodness.
I heard you breathing really loud. So I was like,
no, Lord, they just want me to kind of bring my thoughts up around that. No, the breathing was for prosperity, so she can go ahead and settle. But no, so my thoughts around white supremacy is that, what's supreme about it? It's really white underdevelopment. We got to call it what it is, and so that's my only thoughts.
What is that? What is white? Yeah, for those who didn't watch last week, what is white underdevelopment?
White underdevelopment are the things that we talk about when we're talking about white supremacy. So when we're talking about colonialism, capitalism, just the whole value around objects and money and things and not really caring, and racism, and just the low vibrational practices that we have in our societies that come from white supremacy. It's nothing supreme about it. Let's call it what it is. And so, what I think about it is white underdevelopment, just these principles that are unevolved, so as we evolve, we release a lot of those principles. So no longer, releasing the whole white supremacy, because that still holds to there being some kind of supreme, but it's not. It's absolute underdevelopment and rubbish.
Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa is a great book for those of y'all watching to check out if you haven't read it. Ifeanyi, what's good? What do you make of this moment? I gave you time to think about it. I went to all the other people, so.
So funny enough, like I've been very plugged in, like trying to understand, why this one kind of took off more than every other one, and then I started noticing the fact that it was now crossing outside even the US, North America, right? And it was going to Europe, right? So the main thing that regarding how you mentioned the global, how to make it a global movement. Something that I saw that I had never seen before was how quickly people in Europe are beginning to realize that there is kind of this double standard, because there's always been this assumption that it's places that had slavery that still have this white supremacy structure and have this kind of very violent police culture. It's stronger here, but there's still an element of racism in Europe, and So when I saw the statue of King Leopold being toppled in Belgium, I was like, whoa, because that's something that even in Nigerian groups, WhatsApp groups, when I mention why is Hitler with 5 million deaths is a no? Here is he a no, but somebody else with 10 million around the same era, has statues in the country where he lives. It's probably on currencies. I don't want to get fact checked, but I can almost bet that he's on some legal tender or something. Say, why doesn't it matter that this person and this person did something similar? One person is on one far extreme, the other person is kind of like, he's still a good guy. I had argued, many people don't even know that this guy did, because he just never got and then now people are beginning to realize and reckon that, this King Leopold guy actually did something that was worse as bad as what Hitler did. So I think
finish your thought.
Yeah. So what I see happening now is that people are out as a global movement. The anti-Black movement is being seen for what it is. It's not something that is African. Something that's American. There's still elements of it in Europe, and I think that this is where the countries in Europe are beginning to realize that, okay, we have our own history and we have to do something about it. They might still be way behind the US because they haven't had the civil rights movement. They haven't sat down to reckon with some of these things until now, and it's like, oh wow, we've actually been glorifying this guy. But I think that the awareness that it's becoming very global, and that's something I think we need to capitalize on now to accelerate other parts of the world that are still kind of behind on this movement.
That's really powerful. And I just want to say, I appreciate you bringing up Hitler, because, I always tweet about how, the Jewish Holocaust lasted for 5 to 10 years, depending on which source, 5 million people. And, but the Black genocide never ended, right? It's been going on for 400 years. And so I'm excited to see people's statues getting toppled, right? Who have been glorified. And they say 10 million, and I would, we could easily double it and still probably be accurate. All right, Jean-Louis, what do you make of this moment?
Yeah, I think I'm maybe introduce a sort of Baldwin-esque skepticism. I think this sort of, one might call it collectivism, one might call it a call out, across the world, and especially by corporations who are sort of heavyweights around the world against anti-Black racism, wherever it may be found. At the same time, what we really haven't seen as much is sort of these institutions changing fundamentally. You have one example of the former CEO Alexis Ohanian of Reddit. Williams is
Alexis Ohanian.
And
I love that. Serena Williams.
That's true.
Exactly, right.
Right.
He was doing something interesting with Reddit, right? When he sort of stepped down to sort of make sure that not only he was stepping down, but that the people who were coming into power were BIPOC folks. You don't see that at Nike. You know what I mean? You don't see that at Walmart. You don't see that in Apple. So these sort of call outs, especially by corporations, led me to a lot of cynicism and skepticism. In many ways, too, I think, to be honest with you, beyond just the sort of corporate institutions, I think just even sort of local institutions. I mean, what are you doing locally to affirm the humanity of Black people? I would argue, right? If it's your church, I mean, what are you literally doing in your churches to make sure that what you are going out into the world to express or show doesn't put white as normative or hegemonic, right? Like mission trips, that's a whole different
talk about it.
We can go into. So these are things that I'm really thinking about, and I want to bring in, right? Another thing I thought about this whole movement was, I mean, you also, politically speaking, around the world have had sort of a rise in anti-Black hate, fascism, anti-immigrant hate, right? And a lot of that stuff being, found in so many different countries, right? You can see it in India, you can see it in Germany, you can see it in France, you can see it in the States, you can see it in Mexico, right? And now at the same time, this was sort of challenging those who felt as though they were enlightened. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, you had a lot of people saying, the Trumps of the world need to go. And so when you watch a horrific, almost 9-minute video of what we saw, which is obviously a lynching, you see folks seeing that this is an opportunity to catalyst, to springboard the already movement that was going on against fascism, against totalitarianism, against the sort of deep situated racism that's in the fabric of what has been deemed whiteness in the Western world, right? And so for me, at least, it wasn't as much surprising as it was predictable, right? This is me bringing it back to Baldwin, right? Like the fire next time, right? Like you get a rainbow this time, next time you get a fire, right? and this is it. So for me, I really am. I'm happy to see it in my lifetime, because I'm sure, Bayard Rustin, King, Baker, so many others, when they were, doing the sort of civil rights movements, and they were pushing for what their reality, needed to change about, right? They were thinking that this was the moment. and 50, 60 years later, we're saying this is the moment. And the crazy thing I think about this, and I'll wrap up soon, is that what we have seen with Blackness across the world is that we're diverse. And that sense of diversity makes us have some other sense of unity. And we're unified in our diversity. And we're diverse in our unity. You see the circularity of it all, right? And that in and of itself, I think, has allowed us, regardless of where we are, regardless of where we're stationed in the world, to push us into the next threshold. And that is, a continuation of Black liberation, but nuanced, right? Like now I can walk down the street in a way that I know, so long as I have the app Facebook on me, I have some semblance of justice.
Right.
Okay. Okay. I want to, because you said us, we talked about the global, nature of this movement and how that makes it a bit distinct from previous activism. But I will kind of call out, one thing that a lot of us don't realize is, the boys, we're talking late 1800s, in Africa, in London, in the UK, working with African leaders, right? The same thing in the 50s and 60s. So it's always been global in a sense, right? Now the Europeans waking up to it, and sort of beginning to accept some level of responsibility, that's a bit distinct, right? But this us that we're talking about, what is us? How do we become a collective? That's what you mentioned earlier, Damar. And I want you to answer that question also with some background, because I said I was going to ask you guys about your identity and how you sort of came into your Blackness, right? And so I want to hear from all of you guys, how do we become a collective? What does a collective look like? But also answer that from the perspective of your identity and upbringing, if that makes sense. Damar first.
Okay. So, like I said, I'm a product of a biracial parentage. So I have various familial experiences which are very different from one another. Socioeconomically, my families are very differently situated. Geographically, most of my family's in California, but there's also people who are spread out. And so yeah, I think as I think about what this looks like, for me, I think the collective, to build a collective, I don't think the collective is going to be universal. Just in the same way that there are very few things that are universal, right? There are some things that might hold true or hold, particular relevance to different groups of people, So for instance, me saying that I'm a Black American means that I might have certain things in common with other people who are Black American. But we all have very different experiences, we all grew up very differently, and I think so with that, and we all, I think more importantly, we all have very different politics. And so like when I think about, what does building a collective, I think about Stuart Hall, and I think about like, it's not like, it's not just about your Blackness. It's really about like, what are your politics? Like, what are the things that you value and like that are important to you? And so I think that for me is where, how we build collectives is going to mobilize around specific issues. I think it gets harder when you move it to just a universal platform, because not everybody is on the same page on everything. So even in the United States, there are Black Americans who are out here voting for Agent Orange, right? We're out here saying, we want to make America great again, right? And there's also people who are like, we need to burn it to the ground, right? We need to, get rid of capitalism. We need to, abolish slavery, or, abolish the current institutions. Like we need to abolish incarceration, abolish the police, right? And so it's like those people may not even be able to be in the same room together unless you're able to find like a nexus to begin the conversation. Because just the fact that they're Black isn't going to be the convening point, right? And so, and I think the same could be said, across the diaspora. It's like I have a lot of friends who are from the continent, or people who are like first gen, second gen immigrants, right? And so, and also who are from elsewhere, right? And I think, people don't all think alike on every single dimension, right? And so I think for me, it's really recognizing like, depending on what kind of impact people are trying to have, everything starts at a local level, right? It starts with who who you're in conversation with, who you're in a relationship with, right? And then how you scale that to make it so that you can take that to other places depends, right? But yeah, so for me, I think, starting with a more grassroots approach is a good way. Starting with even a forum like this isn't a bad place to start, depending on who you are, depending on what your goals are, right? Is the next revolution going to come out of the noir press? Maybe, right?
Definitely.
But that's only if the people who are, jumping into the movement, or who want to make this a movement, like actually pour in the energy and effort to make that happen, right? Because some people just want to show up to the party and put on a t-shirt, right? And like, I'm a member of fraternity, Kappa Psi Fraternity Incorporated, right? I'm a noob. So I love my bros, but like we have this thing in Greekdom we call t-shirt wearers. And like, those are people who want to show up for the party, who want to, be in the pictures. But when it comes time to put in the work, you want to step to the back, right? And in this country, I was going to say, like in the United States, like there are people effectively who are on the front lines of different movements, but not everybody's on the front lines. Some people were just pitching in financially. Some people were putting in services other ways they could, right? So, I think we have to get very clear on a lot of things, depending on what it is that we want to do and who it is we want to be. But I think
one key to what you said is the values. It's like, what do you value and what do you actually want to manifest, or what do you want to see in the world? Uzo, how do we become a collective from your perspective? So anybody who hasn't seen, the Black Genius episode with Uzo, you wouldn't have heard that, she grew up Nigerian American in Connecticut. But that's still Black American.
Went to school in Nigeria.
So
the whole
went
thing.
to school in Nigeria, watched people fall and dropping dead. We were talking about oh my God. Okay, so for you, what does it mean to become a collective?
This is interesting. And, Damar, I appreciate your perspective. And I'm interested in really hearing everybody's perspective and just kind of thinking about it. I think, like John Louis said, it's like the diversity and the unity and the unity and the diversity. Like we are all going to be different. I think we just have to accept that. But to really just thinking off top of my head, just really see it like a family. You have a family. What connects the family is pretty much, sometimes it's blood. Many times for us, it's not. It's just a declaration like your family. Everybody's different. but we have this intention. And I think that with what's happening now, and I think, Jean Louis, you mentioned this in terms of like the revolution in the 60s and the 30s and the 1800s, 17, we could keep going. And I think now at this time, we don't need another revolution. We need an evolution. So we need to evolve. Because when we talk about a revolution, we're talking about, you have the RE prefix. You're talking about, we're just going to do it again.
In 50 years.
In 20 years, right. It's just going to happen again. And we need to evolve. You know? So we need to really kind of think about what it is what needs to change on a fundamental level, you know, because even if white, quote unquote, supremacy is gone, you know, white underdevelopment, do we have the proper foundation to not go back into that? You know what I mean? And then it becomes our underdevelopment. So in order to answer the question in terms of unity, I do agree, Jamar. I think we need a nexus. So I think we need like the family leaders, you know, and I don't like the word leaders, you know, but just people who are aware, like this is what's happening. And we do need to like have like a strategic planning. Sorry, I love that. Strategic planning.
That's a 4-letter word at NOR Labs. They curse each other out about that.
With all of us, you know, with these segments, and like what are our values, like as Black folk, as melanated beings, as human beings, right, on this planet, what will help us live better? What do we need? And as melanated people, we do need very specific things, you know, community, certain foods, you know, sunlight, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the things that are kind of common across the board? We need health, we need love, we need these things, you know what I mean? And how can we focus ourselves in these things? And then the people who are quote unquote woke, so the people who are understanding, who are on this road to evolution, to really continue that individually and within their actual families, you know, because we can't talk about unity and, you know, our family structures is jacked, you know? So there's a place where we need individual forgiveness, individual healing, what do you call it? Self-work around among the people that's closest to us. And then it kind of ripples, you know, it kind of has a ripple effect. So I would say like a focus on self-healing, self-growth, evolution, coming to God, whoever your God is. If you don't believe in God, then coming to nature, the grass, something, just coming to something that's higher than ourselves. And then, and going from there, yeah, because otherwise I'm gonna be seeing y'all again in 50 years talking about the same stuff. Excuse me.
God forbid. I love how that dovetails with what Damar said about, you know, starting local. The most local place is yourself.
Yeah,
go within, right? All right, Lanice, I want to hear from you. What do you think it means for us to become a collective?
I mean, I feel like Damar Uzo just said so much. So I feel like I agree with a lot that was said. I think a lot of it is also, in addition to evolution, we also need transformation. I mean, I feel like, you know, during the civil rights era and before then, I mean, I think we're seeing the same thing. The fight is the same. I just think is kind of like what Uzo said, like, how do we make sure that once these systems are broken down, like we have that foundation we can build and continue to grow on. And I think values play a role in that too. I mean, everyone's going to value everything that's different, but at the end of the day, as Black people across the diaspora, we just need to come together because everyone wants the same thing. It might just be worded different. It might just be called different. But I think a lot of it is seeking truth, unlearning stuff that we personally might have learned. Because, I mean, our family might have taught us stuff, and we take that as gold, and that's how we view the world. That's how we view people. So a lot of it is unpacking and unlearning problematic stuff we might have been exposed to as very young children. I guess, again, the truth, the restoration. And then
so I want to say with this question of what we were taught as children, because, you know, as we talk about transformation and evolution and growth, like these are very premium ideals, right? These are things that not everybody can afford. And I guess I want to talk about how we begin to come together, even when we haven't had the opportunity to evolve, right? We haven't been exposed to some of these enlightened teachings, etc. Where do we start? So when we're talking about the family, so what you mentioned, Lanice, about like what we're taught in our families, I want to sit with that a bit, because a lot of our tension comes from, you know, how we were brought up to see other Black groups and ourselves, right? And so I want to hear from you guys individually, like starting with Lanice, what was that sort of journey for you as far as understanding other Black groups and you know, sort of coming into awareness of Blackness and these issues that are plaguing Black people?
I think for me, like, I mean, growing up in a West Indian household, and in my parents' house, the house was Jamaica and everything outside of there was America. So what happens in this house, this is it, and I don't care what happens outside the home. That's like a whole different thing. But I think like some people in my family, like the perception on how Black Americans are viewed, that they're not hardworking, that they're lazy, or they're this, or they're that. And I just had to go. I'm always a person. I'm always like, okay, I hear you saying this, but you know, let me find out on my own. My parents always raised me to like seek things out for myself. And I would say, but other family members had a certain perception. So, you know, you have what my parents were saying and then what my family was saying. I was just like, let me seek this out. I mean, even with how some of them were like, oh, African people are this and they're that. And I'm just like, well, I've never had issues with anybody. So I think it's like unlearning that. I think even in certain cultures, even the stuff with homophobia, how those things are seen, like unlearning a lot of that stuff too. So I think for me, I had to, although I heard what people in my family were saying, I personally had to seek out things for myself, right? Some people are always going to have stereotypes about different groups of people, right? But those stereotypes are not always true. It's like they say Black women, they're loud, they're angry, they're this, they're that, but that's not true. Like, maybe not to piss us off, we're gonna go off, but like, not be loud.
Like, it's not true except for Jamaicans and Nigerian women.
And I mean, one of the things I really appreciated about my parents was just really instilling the importance of what it means to be Black. You know, the pioneers, from the Marcus Garveys to the Nanny of the Maroons, who was a person that was heavily involved in the uprising in the revolt against the Maroons in Jamaica, like the different heroes, how people throughout the diaspora has even contributed to a lot of the movements we've seen in the US. I think even for me going to I live in Washington, D.C., so even when I went to the National African American Museum of History, and I was just looking and just seeing like how people from the continent, from the Caribbean, Afro-Latinos, how everyone has played a role in the history and the building of the U.S. I mean, I've even had conversations one time with a friend, and this was, I was just kind of like taken off guard. And we were talking about what it means to be Black. So I was like, you know, okay, Black, I mean, if you look at it, it's a racial construct that was developed, you know, it defines your phenotype, how you look. You know, we all come in different shades, sizes, and I'm like explaining that to her, and she's like, oh no, well, for her, Black is African American. And I was just like, okay, but do you know, like, there's Black people in Dominican Republic? I was like, now that's a whole nother conversation, because they can interact with me and they'll tell you like, oh, no soy negro, or whatever. You know, there's Black people in Panama. Like, I'm going through, I was like, Brazil, do you know Brazil outside of Africa has the highest population of Black people? Like, I'm like going through all of this with her. Like, oh, no, they're not Black, they're Dominican, they're this, they're identifying them by like their ethnicity or their geographical location. I was like, you sure you went to Howard? Did you ever take the class with Dr. Carr? Like,
damn.
You look at the transatlantic, 95% of the slaves went to Latin America and the Caribbean, 5% to the U.S. And then she looks at me and she's like, oh, you're not Black. why do you want to be Black? You're Jamaican. And I was like, girl, when they see me, they're not going to say, when these
Are you Jamaican?
they're going to say,
Mm.
the Black woman, like the Black girl, like they're going to see me and they're going to know I'm
mhm.
Black. That's all they're going to see. They're
That's
not
all they're
going
gonna
to
see.
anything else. So
I want to hear. I'm sorry, ladies. I want to hear from Ifeanyi, as you know, because when you were talking about, when Lisa was talking about South America, you know, you lived in Brazil for a while, and I remember you saying how like that was where you kind of came to understand race. So if you could talk a little bit about your experience, kind of, you know, discovering Blackness, and even some of the stuff you encountered at Yale, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in a middle class Nigerian home. You always watch TV, you see Michael Jackson, you hear he was Black before, we thought he was white until we heard he, you know. But you always see like Black celebrities and see people on TV, but never really like thought it was in Nigeria or maybe in Africa. I can speak for Nigeria, and more people tend to see themselves mostly based on their tribe, because everyone is Black. So Blackness is a common denominator. So there's no need to emphasize it, because what else are you? Like it's not even a consideration, right? So moving to Brazil was when I was like, I was only Black engineer in my office, you know. But then downstairs where the operators are more like high school, and then associate, not even associate degree, high school level physical kind of stuff. They help us with all the connections and stuff. So the operators are predominantly darker. Brazil is like a spectrum, right? There you see all kinds of mix from the Pele looking, you know, like looks dark as 50 Cent, and you go all the way to people that are very light, you know, there's a lot of mixture. So you see, you know, downstairs, people tend to look more like me. When you go to the associate technicians, they look a bit middle. And then when you come upstairs, you think you're in Europe, upstairs where the engineers stayed, right? So that was the first time I noticed that there's something happening here. And then I started like, yeah, it was super weird. And I started researching and just started asking around, and I started saying, okay, you know, there's something not right here. Because being an engineer, a successful engineer that studied calculus and STEM and very complex engineering concepts was kind of like normal stuff that growing up, we all wanted to go to study engineering. So why have they not studying engineering here to walk into? Yeah, so I started hearing about engineering classes being put on. Like, all my friends are studying engineering. We all knew it from, like, it was like normal, but it wasn't normal for them. You know, so I'm like, what is happening here? And then that was the first time I actually started reading about race. It was in Brazil. That was from 2012 to 2016, right? Late 2015, early 2016. So that was when I started realizing, oh, okay, there's something happening here, right? It is a big difference. And then I asked myself this question, like, I was talking with a colleague that was like, they generally believe that racism doesn't exist in Brazil, even Black people there will argue with you that racism doesn't exist. It's not as confrontational as it is in the US. And I can talk about like why American culture is very confrontational, right? But they don't confront you. And once in a while you see a video, but they're not very outspoken about it, right? So because it's not violent and because they haven't had a civil rights movement, what I see is that when you push for a civil rights movement, you make people uncomfortable, and then it kind of, you sacrifice peace to gain access, right? And Americans are the only ones, Black Americans are the only migrant group that were minority that had disenfranchisement that have succeeded in doing that. Black Venezuelans, Black Mexicans haven't done that. So there's peace, but no access. So they haven't gotten to the place where they already sacrificed peace, you know, to push for reforms, right? So that's why they say there is no racism, because everyone is living happily because they are right there and they're not complete. They're not saying anything like, hey, I'm here because of something. So when I started studying all this, I was talking to a colleague and she said, sorry for digressing. She said, there's no, and I asked her, do you think if I was born in Brazil, because I said it with all sense of pride, I was one of their best engineers there, right? I would have colleagues, and you could see that they were not very used to that. They would want to ask me something technical. They wouldn't want to say it open in the office. They would send me an IM. And if hey, how do I do this? And I'll just smile. I was like, yeah, do this, boom. You know, so I had the respect of being a very good engineer there, right? And so I asked a question. I said, if I grew up look at me, you see me, if I grew up in Brazil, would I be one of your senior whatever engineers here? The answer was very clear. Like if the 2 million Brazilians that were born in Brazil haven't done it, and then the only other Black engineer that ever worked in my company there was a Nigerian too, right? I asked, has there ever been a Black? You see, there's a guy that was here around 4 years ago. His name is Ike. I was told, Ike, that's a Nigerian name, like Ike, right? And I went and I asked around, and I found the guy actually, right? He's in Canada now. So why is it that of the how many million, the largest population of this thing outside the US is in Salvador is just like Lagos. It's a big Brazilian city. Everyone there looks like us. Not as Salvador has never had a black governor, right? It's 99%. And yeah, Brazil is still like, I'm not saying it to like, there's a lot of work and this in Brazil, right? The biggest, it's not even Baltimore, 80% of Salvador is not mixed. They're like as black, because it was if you look at the map for Brazil, the part of the map that was closest to Africa, that horn there, it goes like this. That was where the most efficient place to drop the slaves. So that is Salvador. So it's like 80%. I'm not talking like maybe like mixed or something. They look like me, like big Afro Pele looking people, and they've not had a black governor. The few 12-15% white people or lighter skin mixed are the ones who have. So you start to see that, why is it that of these million people, none of them somehow has stumbled through a university degree and landed to be an engineer in my company? It's not random. And then when I asked her that question, she couldn't answer. She now said, yeah, maybe it would have been. And exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's something that makes it that, for me, like back home, one of my colleagues, we all want to work in oil companies. Like, it was like, how Nigeria is, right? You finish engineering, you want to work in an oil company. And a lot of my friends did it. Not everyone. People would. So why is it that it's like, no, forget about it. Like, and then that was when I started getting into like understanding the whole, like, okay, there's something that is different about when you're in a place where you're not the norm. And then trying to tie this back to what Lamar said. I kind of don't agree with Lamar about, I won't say I don't agree. I believe in like bottom-up and a top-down approach to the whole collective movement. Because what I see is that there are imbalances that a global coordination would help to alleviate, not solve, but help to alleviate. And I'll explain what I mean. So there's this thing called the FVA. Does anyone know about the FVA countries? FVEY. If you have a browser, you can check real quick. It's an alliance that is between, I call them the sons and grandsons of England, FVEY, right? It's a coalition between the US, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Britain. They call them the Five Eyes. They share
the Five Eyes.
The Five Eyes. They call them
global CIA.
Yeah, they share intelligence, and it's not just intelligence. They share like economic. Like you see that capital flows between US. There's some privilege the Canadian has in America. There's a privilege Australian has in New Zealand. It's all that old boys club of the former England. That these 5 countries are just former England. The Australians were like prisoners that were shipped off to an island to go. We don't want them in England. Send them there. They're all British, right? New Zealand, spin-off of Australia, so to say. America, it's founded by British. America is pretty much mostly British for the Irish that are coming. Canada, same thing. Okay, then there's a French. So you see, it's like kind of like a global coalition of old boys, old sons of England. And if you don't have something like this, I think Ghana has started something that, kind of like allows African Americans to come back, and get citizenship. And so I think there should be a kind of a global, and let's learn from the British people. If you are tied to the diaspora, to the African continent, it doesn't matter if you're like the cities of India. Many people don't even know there's a tribe called the Sidi, SIDDHI in India. They're black. They're not the darker skin. They're actually African Indians who went from Ethiopia. They still look very much like us. And they're super, super, super and very, if as long as you have access to this, to that. What that will do is that capital imbalance, right? Like you're probably an African American, you made it here. You're able to inject money back home. And then also another thing, access that you don't have here as an African American to good education at a middle class or lower class, you will see that with the same money, if you could get a boarding school, a high quality boarding school in Nigeria, or in Ghana, Accra, or in Kenya, that will prepare you for coming out of college and in a middle to top tier high school in Nigeria, prepares you for STEM more better than the average American. My sister finished in college and she was really smart, but she finished in college in Nigeria and she came to the US. Her first 2 years in engineering, she had done most of the course content back home. Because you're more STEM ready if you study in a very good Nigerian or Ghanaian high school than you will be if you grow up as a middle income American in an okay but not one of the top schools here. So if we had this kind of global access where there are regulations across African countries with the diaspora, Jamaicans, with people that are descendants of it. As long as you're this, you have the right to come and pay a local school fee. Some kind of like old boys of Africa kind of this. I think there'll be all those imbalance and access to education and capital will start to drop and start to even out. And then people who are middle class Americans here can get STEM education for their kids with the same level of income that they won't get that quality of education here. your kid can do the last 3 years in board. These are very good, very sophisticated boarding schools in Lagos and Accra. They do the board for the last 3 years, and then they come here and they can attend. Like, I know people who are almost perfect score on SAT going to public schools in Nigeria. So I think that I'm not trying to like argue with Demar, but I think that the top-down approach, which is where regulation.
But can we actually put a pin in this? And I want John Louis to be able to talk, but can we put a pin in this and come back? Because I think there's also some things that we need to directly engage with that proposal based on the conversation we're having today. But I want to John Louis to say it.
Okay, I love that. We're going to go a little bit over. I'm just going to warn y'all. So conversation has to finish. Okay. So John Louis, what do you think as far as how we become a collective, and also speak about it from your Miami upbringing, Haitian American experience, how you've interfaced with other Black folk?
Yeah, I definitely want to say, first and foremost, like Black people across the world have a tradition of relationality. So, in other words, you see it manifest in the ways in which you travel around the world. You see a Black person for some way, some reason, some sense how you feel some way that you have to relate. You have to acknowledge that person's being in the world, whether it's a nod, whether it's like a deep, intimate look into one's eyes, whether it's a laugh, whether it's sort of comparing the African experience from around the world, where my mom does this too, or we eat this similar ingredient in some of our foods as well too, and it tastes just like, you know, X, Y, and Z. There's a tradition of relationality that Black people have that a lot of other groups that are BIPOC have as well too, and it's not due to the oppressive factors. And in actuality, like, we just do very different things than, say, white people groups do. We just relate very, very differently, right? I mean, you hear the, you know, the old age, you know, violent argument of saying like, well, you know, if white people weren't oppressing us, then we would do it because it's a human thing. And it's like, no, actually, like, look at human data. Like, there's a very particular set of people doing a very particular set of things for a particular set of centuries. And nobody else in the world was doing this. So, like, you got to name this, right? And this is that sort of white Eurocentric violence and way of relating to other things and people in the world that you see in no other space. I say this to say, though, that we have always been building a sense of collectivism. It has just always been disrupted by the circularity of oppression. And so when you actually think of it, it's almost in the fabric of Blackness to relate. It's almost in the fabric of Blackness to like build some sort of collective, and we do so off the most basic, you know, if I can say this, the most basic shit, like values, right? Like, we just value the most basic stuff that we don't even think, you know what I mean, is something that we need to send hundreds of thousands of people to fight over for, but yet we do, and we still don't get it. Because you can find Black people in multiple armed services around the world fighting for the same basic shit. And what by that I mean life, food and health, educational, economic, social, political opportunities. Like, these aren't things that are grandiose. These are basic stuff. And so how do we build a collective? I'm beyond that question. I mean, how do we build a collective without opposition, without underminings by people who don't necessarily see the value in our own being, right?
I want Uzo to answer that question, and then you can come back, because I feel like
that's a really great question.
But
I mean, that's a really good question.
I did have a point back to even Ifani's point. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about it, right? Like, these sort of, you know, these sort of old boys clubs have been built, right, at the expense and over and against the very people who have had the blunt force of the violence of colonialism, of imperialism, of gender conformity, of heterosexism, of heteronormativity, of white normativity, of all the things that are hegemonic in the world. I mean, in other words, they've been able to do these clubs, right, with unfettered social mobility, extreme amounts of privileges at the expense of everyone else. In other words, without disruption. Let's talk about it. Black Panther
with
Party,
minimal disruption. We have disrupted their shit from time to time.
Garvey, Black Star Guy. I mean, everywhere you see Black people building a collective.
Okay, Uzo, how do you avoid the
Wow. The opposition, the disruption. Well, Jean-Louis, that's such a great question. That's such a great question. That is, and that is how this. I love these conversations because this is how these things like evolve next to next to next. But I think we have to. It has to be a spiritual. It has to be a spiritual fight. You know what I mean? Like we can't go toe to toe with them, evil for evil. We can't do it. We don't have enough evil in our being. Like you said, you know, as melanated beings, as Black folk, we relate a different kind of way. And you're right. We see each other, even if it's just a thought, like, oh, there goes another brother or sister. I see you. You know what I mean? And we can't, you know, we've seen kind of trying, but that's not our nature. So if we try to fight with them as they fight, we will lose, period. You know, we may have some battles we win, but we will win the war. We will lose the war. So I think it's a spiritual thing. I think it's connecting with our ancestors, connecting with our gods, connecting to nature, connecting to these things that, you know, that will help us out, and the power that we have in our melanin. Really using our spiritual technologies, you know what I mean, to be able to tap into that telepathy, you know what I mean, third eye, getting the messages, dreams. Like there's so many things.
Jean-Louis' face. Jean-Louis' face is like,
you know, but it's real. I mean, like even the Haitians when they fought off the French, you know, there was a lot of access into the spirituality, and that's our whole selves. And so I think that's part of it. We have to look in those directions. Like what is the melanin? What in our melanin? What are the gifts there? What are the tools there? And a lot of those gifts and tools are attached to these like metaphysical things that we use every day, but we don't. It's not intentional. Yeah.
So what does the future hold? So we touched on some of these, you know, pop culture events, the movements, the marches that have been happening. People were calling out the Africans and the Caribbeans, like, why y'all not out here? And we were like, we out here. Yeah, Beyonce, Black is King dropped yesterday. I watched some of it this morning. It's pretty, but you know, some Africans are really mad about it, right? What's next? Like, how do we take conversations like this? I'm just going to survey y'all here, right? How do we take conversations like this and give them a home and build like tangible action, traction from these ideas? What's next? How do you engage with the academic studies that deal with, you know, that kind of capture all the stuff that we're talking about and how academic it is. And, you know, it's a lot of beautiful information out there, you know, but then what actually happens, what actually plays out to define our culture, it's happening on Twitter. It's happening on the gram. It's happening on Disney Plus. How do you take these conversations and build traction from them?
I think one part, and I'll just say this right quick, I think one part of it is media. You know, if we can take some of these ideas, some of these values, some of these things and use media to program, you know, the other day we talk about that, and to reprogram the collective consciousness. And so this is what we can do. This is what life can be. You know, here you go, see it, enjoy it, take it in. I think that's one part that I'm interested to hear.
What do you think, Damar?
So I'm having mixed thoughts right now because I'm still thinking about what Fiona was talking about. And I'm trying to be space for this question, trying to integrate both things. So, you know, I think it really depends on what the objective is. Like, you know, because even with programming, right? I agree, sure.
What do you think the objective should be? What do you think the objective should be?
I don't think that's a fair, like, it depends, because like my prescribing an objective may not actually be everybody's objective. You see? So like, it depends on what collectives of people want. Like, if my objective is that I want to make sure that Blackness is represented authentically, organically, and beautifully in the world, you know, I would agree then that, you know, we should be, you know, overloading media with content that puts out that message, right? You know, but I think, again, it comes back to, for me, it comes back to what issue are we talking about? Because I don't think that there's any, you know, should we have more conversations about things? Sure. But as you said, sometimes conversations can be disconnected from where action is actually happening, or like how people are actually experiencing what's happening in the world. You know, should we be trying to find ways to create, you know, different partnerships, you know, be it, you know, nations with, you know, groups of people in the, you know, and what Efiani was talking about, or, you know, be it, you know, organization. Like, I think there's a lot of opportunities for growth and a lot of opportunities for, you know, doing things in partnership. But I do think that, you know, it again, it comes back to the issue. Because I think one of the things that even in thinking about, you know, what was being suggested is like, oh, well, if we just go back to Nigeria, everything will be fixed. Like, one, the US already has a long history of back to Africa movements that goes back to the 1800s. And if you study those movements, you know, you'll see how the messaging is very similar. But part of why that was even pushed for is because, you know, in this case, the United States didn't want to deal with Black people. So they said, hey, why don't you just find ways to go back? They'll take you, they'll help you fix your problems, right? They'll, you know, you'll be catered for. But like, the underlying factor is, you know, in that proposal, I don't understand how that does away with or eradicates white underdevelopment. It doesn't, fundamentally, right? It doesn't eradicate, you know, the very real things that are, you know, creating, you know, affecting people's health right now, or like their lived experiences right now. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I don't have an answer like this is what we need to do. But, you know, in my world, you know, I think one of the things that's a critical conversation right now is, you know, what does abolishing the police look like? What does abolishing the carceral state look like? You know, and not just as a high level objective, but like, what does it look like as a process and a praxis, right? How can we imagine a world where we don't have surveilling institutions dictating everybody's, you know, people's lives, and like dictating where they can and cannot be in the world, right? So for me, I think, you know, that is a convening point. That is an issue that, given the salience of the moment, that can be something that, you know, can drive future conversations. But I don't have an answer for universally what's going to even mobilize that agenda. But
does anybody have an answer to Damar's question? I'm sorry to cut you. As far as what it looks like to design a world without a carceral state or design societies?
I mean, that's a whole conversation in itself. That's a whole conversation in itself. But I think just the short, quick answers, part of that are building sustainable communities, you know what I mean? Where we can get back to the land, being able to have these communities where we're together, food is being grown, people don't have to worry about eating, people don't have to worry about rent, people don't have to worry about any of those things. And I think it starts from like eradicating poverty. You know, I think poverty is a big part of that. It's like so many pieces. And I think all the pieces that we're talking about today, they're all relevant. They're all important. And it's like, how do we organize it? Some of them is simultaneous. Some of it is one by one, but it's like all important. There's so many pieces. But yeah, I think like sustainable, you know, really going back and building some value-based sustainable communities that take care of people's needs as a collective.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree with you. Yeah, I think I agree with what we just said. I think there's an economic component to that, you know. And when we say carceral, I think the main problem with the American, every developed country has you know, they have prisoners, right? They have like punitive systems for. But what you see in countries like Netherlands that are converting some of their empty prisons into tourist centers because they don't have enough people to go to prison to put in jail, right? Is that they don't have the structure of using. I don't know if anyone has watched the things on Netflix that explains how from slavery and went to prison, right? That is a very good thing, right? They don't have that structure. So it's pretty much broken here. Some people would say it's not broken, it's working the way it's designed to work here, right? So it's a broken system that now becomes a problem. And the one thing you always see that correlates, tracks very well, is that the more upper income a group become, the less they have to, the more power they assert in the society, and the less the less violations that you can see on the street. There's a kind of violation that a very wealthy law professor, living in a kind of neighborhood in New York wouldn't experience day to day. The more a group of people start moving out of some certain societal level, the less they become exposed, the less they become at risk to some of these small things that alter the trajectory of a person's life. And the easier it is for them to course correct, even if they get exposed to that kind of once in a time, it's easier. People here send their kids out of the country, people that can afford it. He's running into problems with bad association that have put him in this casserole system. They send him out, go study internationally. And he course corrects, right? So I like what you said also about like political, economic aspect to it. And that's why I keep saying that, if we can, there has to be a top-down, bottom-up approach. Damar's point about the bottom-up approach is very good. The top-down approach that has to do with institutions, governments coming from the power structure that they have to enforce these things in form of bilateral agreements, and like coordination, will also help to close this gap that puts these Black minority communities in this foreign or these places where they are minorities at the bottom of the ladder. The moment they start climbing out of the ladder, you will gradually see that the incarceration thing stops being a big problem for that group. That is what I think. I could be wrong, but this is my opinion on the issue.
Any other thoughts from Jean-Louis or Lenice? And then I'm going to ask my last question and we're going to wrap it up.
You can go ahead, Lenice.
I felt like you had a response to what Damar said. From your face.
You, Lenice.
You? No?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, I think Damar and Ifeanyi both hold radically different views. And correct me if I'm projecting Damar as to the comment about the top-down approach. At the same time, I mean, depending on the context, either or could be sort of assumed, or either or could be more effective. But what I will say is, I think sometimes we need to be more conscientious of the assumptions that we bring in when we do impact or affect strategies, especially on our own people. I mean, I don't need to repeat what one of the greatest poets, philosophers, have said, because Black women always come through and save save us. Audre Lorde on her piece on the Master's Tools. I think there's some profound stuff that's being said.
You've been talking about these Master's Tools for 3 years. As
a sort of caution, you know what I mean, to really reflect on the strategies that we think might really help us. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't know if Damar or Lenice wanted to say anything.
We gotta wrap up. Some of you guys have answered this question already. If you feel like you already answered it, you don't have to answer it. If you haven't, then you answer it. So the last question is, what does Black liberation mean to you? Uzo's answered it because she's been on what's the dream? You close your eyes and there's no white underdevelopment, and it's just reparations have been distributed. Like, what does the dream look like? What does liberation look like? John will be laughing. You're such a pessimist. What's your dream, Negro?
Don't give me crack up over here.
One of y'all gotta have a dream. Damar sip his coffee. Okay, I'll just play some music. I'll play some music while you think about it.
I want to hear everybody's dream.
I want to hear at least one. I gotta hear at least one dream. So let me pull up. But you know what? There was something that you said. I had to go back and pull up Oni's message, Uzo, because when Jean-Louis was talking about the way that Black people relate, there's a book I think it's from the book, Philosophical Aspects of Cultural Differences. We talked about this last week as well. And I think it's a really great piece of data for everybody to hold on to. But, you know, the author, Edwin Nichols, he talks about where he has this table where he outlines the axiology from European Euro-Americans versus Africans and so on and so forth. And so he explains the axiology of European Americans and Europeans as putting the highest value on the object or the acquisition of the object. Whereas Africans, African Americans, Hispanics, Arabs, he categorizes as placing the highest value in interpersonal relationships between persons.
Mm-hmm. And the Native Americans, what is that unity?
And the Native Americans, it's about the spirit. It's about the spiritual connection. I mean, I think if nothing else, you know, liberation is us actually being able to live out that axiology, right? Without disruption. That connection.
Okay. So I guess one thing I can say.
No, go ahead, Damar.
I was just gonna say, you know, when I think about, you know, Black liberation or what that might look like, you know, as a materiality, you know, I mean, I think about a world where Black people can live freely away from state-sanctioned or privately sanctioned violence. You know, a place where Black people can have access to the resources that they need to address not only basic needs, but just, you know, fundamentally to address basic needs, but also, you know, the holistic needs that we have as people. But I also think that, you know, I think too, you know, Black liberation is also somewhat tied and is intricately tied to, you know, the liberation of other people, right? Because our histories are intertwined. And so I think, you know, the way I conceive of Black liberation is that, you know, our liberation cannot be effectively re-entrenching the oppression of other peoples, right? Otherwise, we're essentially revolving, you know, as Uzo said, versus evolving, right? So that's what I think about.
Okay. You fine?
Yeah, I think it's again. I try to look at how you can achieve the same results by attacking something from different angles. So just to correct, I don't disagree with Damar's bottom-up approach. I just feel that it should come from both sides, makes it faster. I think about this. I don't think that. Again, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who's been mostly on the continent. There's an aspect of self. Kind of accountability that I don't think we've explored. We've done the best we can in terms of leadership back home, in terms of like how we've run our governments and stuff. There's an element of like interference and all that, but from outside influences and all that. But I still think that where we are now, there's an aspect of actually holding our leaders accountable back home that we have not explored fully. So in the US here, the superstructures that affect a lot of African Americans are some mostly outside the circle of control. There's a lot of effort to like dismantle those things and make change, and it's picking up traction. Back home, there are some structures too that make it difficult for for you to get the trade terms and some connections that are already built that excluded African, and things like that. There is that it stems from colonialism, but there is also an aspect of this, some aspect of what is holding us back that is actually just from bad leaders that haven't become very aware and very awake, right? I don't know if anyone knows about Botswana. I think it's the only country in the continent that has been growing steadily from the 80s, and they're silently just creeping up, and you're just going to hear about them very soon, like this, the moving income levels are going up and all that. That's a country that has been able to take ownership of their liberation rights. Rwanda, it's a mixed story, benevolent, competent dictatorship, so he doesn't get approval in all circles because he's running an autocracy. But you still see that there are some communities, again, in Africa that have been able to take their own destiny, there's some things you can control and some things you can't control. Let me just wrap by summarizing and saying that the things that are within your circle of control, we have to exhaust those ones. This applies mostly to the continent, right? Let's exhaust all the levers that are within our control. It's going to help us so that it's not when we've exhausted everything outside, then we look back and say, oh, we haven't still fixed this, and we're still here. Yeah, that's just my own take on it.
So I have a quick question. So like if we think about that and let's say all of that has happened, what's one thing, what if we peek into that world, what is one thing about that world that sticks out to you?
What world? Sorry.
Like a liberated world, like a world
okay.
on the other side of Black liberation. Sorry. Yeah, no, you could. You can think about that. We can come back.
Yeah, I definitely say, I mean, when you peek into that world, what you will find is sort of an unfettered, like unhindered social, political, economical mobility, development, and innovation of Black people. No chains, literally no chains, no walls, no hurdles, no obstacles, in the sense that we understand obstacles and hurdles. It's kind of crazy to even think about those things, because when we talk about our sort of obstacles, everyone else in the room looks kind of crazy at us, like, damn, those are real things that you actually have to overcome. And some obstacles you don't even want to say. Isn't that crazy? You have to overcome the obstacle of even talking about obstacles.
That's real.
So when I take a peek into that, I see that, and to sort of switch the conditions of what Damar said earlier regarding the liberation of Black people have to be connected to the liberation of other people. I want to switch the conditions and make the Black liberation necessary. The liberation of other people has to be connected to the liberation of Black people.
That's real.
What I fundamentally believe is that once we get our shit together, everybody else is going to fall in place, because they always follow us. They always have. And so as much as, one of the things that has bothered me about this moment is all of the energy being poured and directed and just shot at white people. Like, please love us. Stop hating us. Stop killing us. Shut the fuck up. They're not going to stop. Why should they? Why would they?
Right.
We need to get our shit together. Everybody else is going to fall into place, because they're not going to have a choice but to do so, because we have the land. All right. I'm going to wrap it up there. This has been fun. Oh, well, I didn't want to force you if you want to. Uzo.
Sorry.
No. We got to go. I want to eat.
Okay.
Denise, do you have an answer to the question, though? Do you have an answer to the question?
I agree with everything that was said, but I would say another thing that I would add to that, the great Robert Nesta Marley, aka Bob Marley, said it himself, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, because none but ourselves can free our minds.
Right.
And I think also that starts with us changing how we view ourselves and how we think about ourselves.
That self work that Uzo mentioned earlier. I was listening to Deepak Chopra in the bathtub earlier. Like, I think every Black person should have to do that. Like, that should be a requirement. Like that mindset shift. Like, how do we make that accessible to everybody at any income level? So I thank you for sharing that. Thank you, everybody who's been watching. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate you. We're going to rope these guys, in and come back and continue this conversation. Let us know how you want to hear, or see the conversation continue. How do you want to participate in the conversation? If you want to be on a future town hall, email us, editor@norpress.org. And we're building our visionary writing team. So if you want to join our writing team, our Radical Writers Collective, email editor@norpress. All right. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, all the good stuff. Follow our Facebook page and make sure you join our mailing list. We love y'all. Thank you. Eat your greens, take your vitamin C, get your sunlight.
Subscribe to the YouTube so you can get the notifications when we pop up.
Subscribe to our YouTube. Love on yourself. Like, emancipate yourself. We don't need anybody else to liberate ourselves. All right. Deuces, y'all. Till next week.
Thank you for
Bye.
Bye.